So let's meet Oscar Wilde in 10-12 minutes, if I can. Oscar Wilde is a genius, okay? So try to be positive and to understand his greatness. So he was born in Dublin in 1854 and he became a disciple of Walter Pater. Walter Pater was the theorist of aestheticism, accepting the theory art for art's sake. In another video, I'm going to explain what aestheticism is. He became a fashionable dandy. Dandy was a fashionable figure at the time, the elegant man, rich man, of course, who could afford a life of pleasure, of elegant clothes, of parties, etc., etc., etc. Dandy, the British dandy is very different from the French dandy. While the French dandy, probably you studied Baudelaire and Verlaine, they were quite addicted to drugs and to a life of deterioration, because the artist, according to them, the artist had to exploit the roots of art and to lead a life of pleasure, just to understand the mystery of the soul. While the British dandy, he didn't like the deterioration or degradation of habit. Okay, the British dandy is a snobbish man. So anyway, let's go back to Oscar Wilde. He was one of the most successful playwrights of late Victorian London and one of the greatest celebrities of his days. Unfortunately, he suffered a dramatic downfall and was imprisoned after being convicted of gross indecency for homosexual acts. He was in love with, he married, he had children, but he discovered that he was not born for a marriage life, and he preferred boys, good-looking boys. But unfortunately, the father of Lord Alfred Douglas didn't accept this relationship, and so he was denounced. He died in Paris in 1900, completely forgotten, completely miserable. He was a clever talker. Some of Wilde's famous quotations are, "I have nothing to declare except my genius." He declared this when he went to the USA for a series of lectures, and at the borders, when he arrived, the customs asked him, "What do you have to declare?" And he said, "I have nothing to declare except my genius." Experience is simply the name we give our mistakes. A man can be happy with any woman as long as he does not love her. One should always be in love. That is the reason why one should never marry. I agree with this. No, I don't. Art is the most intense mode of individualism that the world has known. And this is quite true, because the artist can be understood only by himself or herself. He wrote many works in poetry, poems, the Ballad of Reading Gaol. We are going to study the Ballad of Reading Gaol. Reading, the pronunciation is Reading, remember this, and it's a city quite close to London. Jail is the old word for prison, and written like this, not Jail. Fairy tales, The Happy Prince and Other Tales, The House of Pomegranates, written for his children, and you probably read The Canterville Ghost. novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, and many plays for the theaters, Lady Windermere's Fan, A Woman of the Importance being Ernest, which we're going to study, and Salome. While the aestheticism, he adopted like the aesthetical ideal. He affirmed, my life is like a work of art. And he was very famous for his clothes and for a flower he usually wore on his jacket. His aestheticism clashed with the didacticism of Victorian novels. So the idea that art is for art's sake is just, the meaning is just art has no objective. The artist is the creator of beautiful things. Art is used only to celebrate beauty and the sensorial pleasures, and virtue and vice are employed by the artist as raw materials in his art. So no artist has ethical sympathies. An ethical sympathy is is an unpardonable mannerism of style. Of course, this was a reaction against the ugliness of the Industrial Revolution. The Picture of Dorian Gray, a very famous novel, which is whose theme we can say is very similar to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So it's about the duality of our soul, the evil and the good. It appeared in 1890, firstly in a magazine, and then the novel, the chapters, it was revised and extended. It reflects Oscar Wilde's personality, and it was considered immoral by the Victorian public. The plot and the setting. It is set in London at the end of the 19th century. The painter, Basil Hallward, makes a portrait of a beautiful young man, Dorian Gray. While he is being depicted, a friend of the painter, a very mysterious figure, Lord Henry, admires Dorian, and he suggests to him, oh, well, Dorian, you are very good looking, you are young, but you are not going to be young and good looking forever, so you must live your life at the extreme. You must enjoy your life. And Dorian, at that precise moment, thinks, oh, well, that's a nice thought. And he expresses a wish. So why do I have to get old and not the portrait instead? And so there's a particular moment in the novel where you can understand that this is a sort of spell, a sort of pact with the devil. And from that moment on, Dorian Gray will remain young and the portrait will get old and ruined and spoiled. So Dorian's desires of eternal youth are satisfied, and experience and vices appear on the portrait, while Dorian remains young and good-looking. So Dorian lives only for pleasures. The painter discovers Dorian's, so this is Basil, the painter discovers Dorian's secret, but is killed by Dorian. Later, Dorian wants to get free himself from the portrait. He can't stand this situation any longer. So he goes up to the attic where he has hidden the portrait, and in a fit of anger, because he wants to go back to his innocent soul, to his previous life, he stabs it, but in so doing, he kills himself. So this is very similar to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. At the very moment of death, the portrait returns to its original purity, and Dorian turns into a withered, wrinkled, and loathsome man. I heartily suggest you to remember this adjective: withered, wrinkled, and loathsome. The main character of Dorian Gray are Dorian, of course, who represents the ideal of youth, beauty, and innocence. Lord Henry Wotton, a brilliant talker, sharp in his criticism of institutions. This is the dark figure of the novel. Basil Hallward, an intellectual who falls in love with Dorian's beauty and innocence. He becomes an example of how a good artist can be destroyed in a sacrifice for art. The narrative technique is quite traditional. So the story is told by an obtrusive third-person narrator. The perspective adopted is internal, since Dorian's apparition is in the second chapter. And it is a process of identification between the reader and the character, so you sympathize with him. The language of the senses is used to describe the settings. It is a modern version of Dr. Faust. A temptation is placed before Dorian, so a potential ageless beauty. Lord Henry's cynical attitude is in keeping with the devil's role in Faust. Lord Henry's acts as a devil's advocate. And the picture stands for the dark side of Dorian's personality. The moral. Well, apart from the fact that Oscar Wilde said no morality in my novels because aestheticism has got no objective, no goals, no moral lessons. Well, in the end, Dorian is punished, and so this is a contradiction. Every excess must be punished, and reality cannot be escaped. So when Dorian destroys the picture, he cannot avoid the punishment for all his sins, and so he's going to die. The horrible, corrupting picture could be seen as a symbol of the immorality and bad conscience of the Victorian middle class. The picture, restored to its original beauty, illustrates Wilde's theory of art. So art survives people, art is eternal. And this is a connection with, remember, John Keats' ideas. The importance of being earnest is one of the most famous, most enduring popular play. And now let's have a look at the importance of being earnest. I love this play. It is extremely funny and extremely clever. So the story is set in a fashionable Mayfair of London's West End during the late Victorian era. The protagonists are two young aristocratic men, Ernest Worthing and Algernon Moncrief. Ernest, written like this with E-R-N-S-E-S-T, has got the same sound, the same pronunciation as Ernest, E-A-R-N-E-S-T, which means honest. Okay? So Ernest, you can find as in the title, Ernest, this is honest. Ernest, this is Ernesto in Italian. Okay? Ernest, actually called Jack, was adopted at an early age by a Mr. Thomas Cardew, but you don't know this till the end of the play. Jack has invented an alter ego, a younger brother called Ernest, who lives in the city. Humor comes from the characters' false identities, and of course, witty dialogues and satires of Victorian hypocrisy. I am going to stop here because the time is over, so we are going to discuss this together, the characters and the dialogue and also the theme is extremely important also today. So, you know, the hypocrisy of society. And so I'm going to stop here and we can talk about this in class.